Miami Heat, 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 Miami Heat. It feels like Miami. Welcome. I'm not G. I'm actually subbing in for G. Actually, I'm not even subbing in for G. G is no longer a starter. I'm taking the spot. This is what we're doing. We got to mix it up. G wasn't giving us what we needed. He didn't like to pass the ball. He didn't like to come prepared. So here I am. I'm stepping in for G. And we're going to see what happens. I'm trying to get a triple-double. This is what I'm trying to do. So let me welcome my guys with me. We got Brian Goins on the math ones and twos.
I'm just here so I don't get fined. Also, G totally walked out of shoot around this morning. Our podcast shoot around. We had a production meeting and he walked out. That's why he's off.
He lost his joy.
Yeah.
He lost his joy.
As one would say.
And I got my guy Kyle, as I like to call him, Kyle Barker. If you know, you know.
What's going on?
So we just gonna jump right into it. So everybody knows, if you know me, I don't know anything when it comes to the numbers. I don't know how we get players. I don't know how much it costs. I don't know anything about any of it. This is why we got Brian here. So first off, we're going to jump right into what came out today. Actually came out a couple of months ago, but officially came out today, that it looks like Fox might be on the move, and they're saying his preferred destination is the Spurs. So I want to talk about that first and how that would look if the Heat decided to throw their hat in the ring. So while Brian is getting things ready, I'm just going to go to Kyle for a second. Kyle, what do you think? Do you even think the Heat would even stand a chance if they put up, quote unquote, what their best offer would be?
I think they can get something out of the deal. The problem is it wouldn't be Fox. And I think that's kind of where we're at right now is Spurs have so many, they still have their picks. They have tradable contracts that I think would fit the win now timeline that, apparently Sacramento wants. I would love if we got Fox. Realistically, I think we'd get somebody out of the Spurs if we threw our hat in the ring. And I think that's kind of where we would need to pivot. I know there are fans who would prefer Fox be the acquisition, but I can't imagine that that's exactly what happens because we don't have enough picks or draft capital to make a substantial offer where it's like a couple of guys and a few draft picks. But I would throw our ring in here simply because we need to move Butler. That's a big part of it. And we need to get some kind of assets, whether that's expirings or some draft capital going forward. I think that's probably what I would do if I was the Heat. I don't work for them. This is just my suggestion, though.
Okay. Is it Ty? I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Ty, thank you for jumping in here with the 20 bones. We love it and appreciate it. Let me just read this real quick. Love what y'all do. Just my way of saying thanks. Your shows are great. I have a question. So I want to get to this before I don't get to this. Knowing how Miami is, do you think they would try to go all in for Fox or wait for 2026, have more money and try to get Luka? I don't think Luka's passing up probably the most lucrative deal ever. Like, I just don't think it's happening. But if you guys want to weigh in, please go ahead. Brian.
So in terms of the whole pursuit of Luka, it would take Luka Dončić turning down what Tiff was just saying, the biggest contract in NBA history for a single NBA player in terms of like the deal that they're signing, not all the money that they're making throughout their entire career, but just one deal. It'd be close to 300 million, or just over 300 million. Over 5 years, he would be signing an extension with the Mavericks on the Supermax scale. And he's able to actually sign that this off season, even if he doesn't make All NBA, because he already made All NBA last season and the years before. So it's really hard to say that he would turn that down. They would have to be some sort of back channeling that the Miami Heat would have to have some assurances that he would, one, test free agency, and two, would put them very high on their list. Now, right now, I'm not saying that's the case, but there have been speculation that maybe Goran Dragic and Luka might have that relationship still where it's possible that they could have communicated to how Miami is and how they treat, their players here. Obviously, the Jimmy situation is not really helping right now, but I think if he even got that far, there's no way that Dallas would keep him and not try to move him before he becomes a
Right.
free agent. So that would be like my main concern. And like if that becomes the case, Miami clearly doesn't have the assets to go after a guy like Luka right now on the trade market. There's only like maybe 3 teams, and probably like the OKC Thunder would be like the one team I would say, yeah, they'll probably just put in all their chips that they have to go after a guy like him, because like he's really the difference maker that would ever reach that sort of stage since like LeBron or KD, switching teams.
Right.
That's that kind of player that would be on the market, and it's really hard to get those kind of guys. And I just don't see right now Luka, one, asking out, and then two, even like making that far to get to free agency where Miami gets to use their cap space to even like get into a meeting and pitch him.
Right. Kyle, you want to add anything?
You mentioned OKC. It would take, you mentioned it would just take some connections, some relationships. I don't think that he'd have that. There's like no signs that point, Luka in this direction.
Right.
However, if I did have to say a team that I possibly think would have the assets, or at least the players to trade for a Luka, would probably quietly be the Nuggets. They have guys that they could throw. Obviously, we don't know if that's actually been happening, because that can technically be considered tampering. But Dončić and Joker clearly have a relationship. They're clearly cool with each other. So I could see that happening more than anything else. And I don't think we have $300 million to give him, which is really the biggest problem here. Like the $80 million is nice, but overall, there's just not enough. I don't think we have enough cap space. We're not in a position to give him that contract, especially when you have the Tyler. I'm assuming his extension is kicking in.
So I'll quickly, I'll chime in on that. Miami would have the cap space to sign at his max if he hit the free agent market, but it's a different deal than what he would be turning down, because what he'd be turning down is a max contract at the super max, which is 25% of the cap.
He has to take less, right?
30%. He'd be taking less. So it's asking him to turn down a lot of money. And even if, say, he got traded to Miami wouldn't be able to give him that same extension, because that kind of contract is only given to players who are basically re-signing with their own teams, because it's part of the new collective bargaining agreement contract extension called the designated player extension. Essentially, if a team has a guy that they believe is, NBA worthy, he's, met certain criteria, he's played, certain X amount of seasons, then they can offer that kind of contract to him. It's the same contract that Bradley Beal got with the Wizards. It's the same kind of contract that John Wall signed. I think also with the Wizards. And it's the same type of contract, that a lot of these NBA superstars are now signing nowadays. So it's just really hard to say that he would turn that down, because one, I don't think there's been any NBA player that's turned down that kind of contract. He'd be the first.
Right.
So you're asking a lot of. He would have to hate Dallas that much to want to leave, because in my honest opinion, it'd be better for him to just get that contract extension and then ask for a trade afterwards.
Right. I just think before we get to Fox, I just honestly think a lot of these guys aren't going to make it to free agency.
No.
And this is because you really are going to have to want to leave your situation. And I think a lot to take, right. So I don't even know how many of these guys are going to, get to free agency. And I think this is where we get to Fox, because obviously he's not, if they're thinking he's not going to resign to them, so they are doing the responsible thing, and they're checking the temperature of other teams to see what they could get. So Brian, if you're the Heat, without throwing in the kitchen sink, what are you offering?
I mean, it really just depends on what
the kitchen sink is. Bam.
Kitchen sink is Bam.
Yeah.
I mean, and in that case, I don't think Fox would want to come, because obviously they have that relationship.
No.
Kentucky Day.
Without throwing in the kitchen sink.
You're saying okay.
Yes. So Bam would still be with the Heat.
Okay. Well, so we can go about this a lot of different ways. I think we'll just play. Honestly, I think this episode is really just going to be us playing around with the NBA trade machine, and I really do prefer the one from Spotrac because they really do take into account all the different aprons and aggregation rules, and they have all the different types of trade exceptions on here as well as the pick situation. So I really do prefer Spotrac. If you guys want to use a trade machine, I would stay away from ESPN's. They haven't updated that one in forever.
5 years, actually.
Fanspo's been pretty decent too. They actually just updated theirs, but I just prefer Spotrac, and they also have an app now that you can download on iOS. So obviously you can see it right here. So we're going to start with the Heat, and then we're going to start with the Kings. Are we just doing a 1-for-1 deal, see what that looks like first, and then maybe start branching out to multiple teams? Let's start there. Okay. So if we're starting there, obviously the player that's going to be probably traded at some point is Jimmy, but let's assume that he's already been traded at that point, and maybe Miami gets a couple contracts and a couple picks. Now, the only issue with that is unless Miami expands that deal that they have with Jimmy, they can't aggregate those contracts unless somehow, because what is De'Aaron Fox making? $34.8 million. That's the trade match that Miami has to match in order to get him. They can't go over, and well, actually, no, they can't go over, but they can't go under that amount. So it's going to be interesting how they would trade match.
Brian,
so
can you share?
Is it not sharing?
No.
Oh, well, I thought it was. My bad. I'm literally looking at my screen, not looking at you guys, so I apologize.
That's all right.
Go ahead.
Here we go.
All right, so I have De'Aaron Fox right now going out to Miami. So he's making $34.8 million next season, $37.09 million the following season. So if Miami's going to trade match for that, they're going to have to send out at least $34.8 million in contracts. Basically, that becomes a situation where I think you have to somehow trade Terry Rozier or a mixture of Hero, and probably Duncan Robinson. There's ways to get there. It's just how exactly you're going to send out the contracts that you need to. Right. I think I would like to see what it would look like if we tried just sending Terry. Obviously, if you're losing a point guard, you're getting a point guard back. He has the same amount of years left on his deal. It might be something that they might, potentially take back as a replacement, in terms of salary. So still failing because Miami needs to take back. They need to send out basically another $9.9 million in salary because they can't go over that amount. So in order to send out another 9.9, we got to send out a couple more contracts. Listen, I mean, it really would start looking at probably these guys first, like Jovic, Jaime, Ware, before we start looking at guys like Haywood and Richardson. So of those young guys, who are you most likely wanting to trade? I think right now, most Heat fans will probably want to keep Ware out of this deal. And for good reason. He's been practically like a unicorn in terms of what the Heat had been needing for years as a front court partner next to Bam. So I think maybe Jaime would be the guy that potentially would need to be in this package. Right. And I think probably Jovic as well. And you're looking at a situation where it's very close to what the package was going to be like for Damian Lillard. The only difference is instead of Hero's contract being in this deal, it's Rozier. And then, as you're looking on here, that trade still doesn't work because Miami still needs to send out another $3.7 million in salary. Right. You could do that actually with just Love's contract and you make it. Now, the only issue is Miami would have to fill out another 3 more roster players on their team, and then Sacramento would have to waive 2 players before they could process this trade. So that's why I think a 3-team deal probably is going to need to happen, unless Miami probably includes Hero in this package or contract like Duncan Robinson with Hero, and you get something else back from Sacramento.
You have to even get them to answer the phone. Like I'm not picking up the phone for Terry Rozier.
Yeah, that might be a case where they need to try to find a third team that takes his contract. And then maybe, look, I really do like a lot of the 3-team deals where Toronto's been in it. I think Toronto has incentive to try to, use the expiring contract of Bruce Brown. And I think that could be a contract that could end up being sent to Sacramento maybe. That kind of type of salary would, obviously expire at the end of the year. And then
Right.
in that situation, Toronto doesn't lose Bruce Brown for nothing. Like, they can use his salary, get back maybe a couple second round picks, and in a way they,
Right.
gain draft capital for just being a facilitator in that deal. And yeah, you eat a year's salary, but like, who else are you really getting? You're Toronto, and you're still rebuilding. Like,
Right.
you're not using that cap space to go after anybody else. So I think that could be a potential third team. So if we want to try doing that, let's try it. So use Miami, or including Toronto, and then obviously still keeping Sacramento in this deal.
Right.
I think if we try doing that, we're sending Terry instead now to Toronto. And then obviously we're going to send De'Aaron Fox to Miami. Now, I think the contract, like I was saying earlier, I think Bruce Brown's $23 million, should probably be in this deal being sent to Sacramento. Now, his $23 million is obviously way less than the $34.8 million that De'Aaron Fox is making. You're still going to have to trade match a little bit, but what helps is actually Toronto can actually trade match up to $7.25 million right now. They can bring back that type of salary. So it helps, so that the salary matching helps make it a lot easier for Miami to basically use Toronto and save some salary cap on Sacramento's books for the season. So I think if we're going to try doing that, I still think it's going to have to be at least two of these young prospects that Miami drafted in Jaime and Jovic, not to Toronto, but to Sacramento.
Right.
And then you're still having to send out at least one more contract. I still think Love makes sense, but I mean, you can make the case that maybe Hayward can make sense too.
So can we see what it looks like? And I'm reluctant to do this, but can we see what it looks like if Tyler is the main piece, not Rozier, or Tyler?
If we did Tyler to Toronto, I don't feel like. So that doesn't make sense as a 3-team deal, in my opinion. I feel like that would be a straight up deal with Sacramento, because wouldn't you rather have Tyler Hero's contract instead of Bruce Brown at that point?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the reason why I was doing the 3-team deal. But I mean, we can do that next. Let's just keep with Terry Rozier first. So we're still sending him out to Toronto. We're still looking for another $3.7 million in salary to send out. So. And Kevin Love's out, is in that range. You got Clover, you got Haywood.
What if we took? This is rough. If you took Jovic off and you put Duncan there, what is that? Is that
That's
enough?
There's going to be a lot of extra. There's going to be more salary that Sacramento would have to send out. So if you did that, you're sending him to where? Sacramento?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so who's Sacramento now having the trade? Because Miami can send that because that's over the amount of money that they need a trade match. But then it's failing because the Kings are over the apron and they're hard cap too. So for their hard cap, because they made that sign and trade deal with to bring in DeMar DeRozan.
So do you send?
So $4.2 million they need to cut essentially.
Would you send Jaime to the Raptors then? Would that end up making the deal work? So you're technically sending Terry and Jaime to Toronto, and the Kings.
I mean, let's see. So what we could do is maybe instead of sending out Bruce Brown, maybe they can do a cheaper contract. Like, I don't know, is Kelly Olynyk able to make this work? Probably.
They are. Mitchell Davion is also apparently, but I'm seeing a.
Oh, that's right. He used to play for Sacramento. He can't reacquire him, so he would have to probably go to Miami. That trade would work. Miami could get Davion Mitchell and De'Aaron Fox. You trade Terry Rozier, so you gain 2 point guards. You lose one. The Kings acquired Duncan Jaime. Oh wait, I didn't. Wait, hold on. I saw Terry Rozier on this deal. I mean, that could work too if we had Terry, but I thought we were trying to do Hero. This is fun, guys.
I think it's just like I don't really, and the Raptors, I haven't really watched them this year. Are they young? They're pretty young.
Raptors are young.
Yes,
right? They're 14 and 35 or 34.
So it's like you don't want Terry in your locker room at this point.
Fair enough.
Like it's just one of those things where, like, how do you, like, everyone wants to see the Bam Tyler Fox, but like,
how do you get to that without? Because you're ending up in a position where you do something similar to the Gobert trade, which is annoying. You're sending potentially 3 or 4 guys to get back one guy, and still having to fill in roster with low end contracts that don't take up cap space. But that's such a difficult thing to do in the middle of a season, truthfully.
Right.
And finding free agents that are
right.
available.
Our counterpoint is like you're basically swapping out a cheaper contract for Jimmy. You're still sending out probably Rozier or Hero if you're going to make this trade without Jimmy. Now, if you're making the trade with Jimmy because he hasn't been traded yet, this becomes a lot easier, I think. But that becomes a lot more complex.
Could we do
because you can use Jimmy's contract and not have to mess around with Rozier and Hero's salary to make a trade match work. But now you're talking about a lot of multiple teams. But what you could do is you're rerouting maybe some of the assets you were going to get for Jimmy Butler otherwise, and then you're sending it all to Sacramento or whoever else is going to end up facilitating this deal. Whether that be draft picks, young players, certain contracts that might be more, feasible to Sacramento that might still want to compete. That's where I think this could become more interesting because they haven't traded Jimmy Butler. But at the same time, if you haven't traded Jimmy Butler, you don't have that deal lined up. How are you going to potentially also negotiate a trade for De'Aaron Fox if you, one, still don't know what kind of, contract you're taking back? And then two, you don't really have a clarity on your draft situation just yet to see what picks you can really send out outside of your 2030 or 2031 first-round pick. Now, if you could somehow get back other first-round picks and you can start unlocking some of the ones that you have currently locked, like your 2028 first rounders locked because you still have that 2027 pick protected in the Charlotte deal for Rozier last offseason. And then you also have your 2025 pick, locked for the deal that you have currently tied up. That's with OKC and the Jimmy Butler trade that we had made years ago when we acquired him. Like that's where this becomes interesting because Miami could open up like a 2029 first round pick because they still own basically all their picks in those years. And then, in the offseason, you end up getting your 2032 available to trade. So, like, there's ways you can make, like, a conditional picks trade now, sure, but teams want unprotected first. And the only way to really get there is if you can somehow get back your first or get other teams' first-round picks and use the stepping rule in your favor.
Right.
And it's possible.
So they could go swap if possible, correct? Because
absolutely.
Technically,
but
go ahead, Tiff.
How many years does Fox have left on that contract? 1?
This year and next season.
So that's 2 years?
Okay.
Yeah, 2 years. So you got a year and a half of his services available, and it sounds like from what I've read in terms of reports, any team that trades for him has to offer him an extension right away.
Right. Okay, because that is also a concern of mine. Like you want to make sure if you give up however many assets, you want to make sure he's staying.
Yeah, I think he would sign an extension if he were to get traded to a team that he'd be, willing to stay with. Right. I think Miami is on that list. I just don't think they're at the top of the list right now. It sounds like San Antonio is. We can talk about them later.
Like they really do. It's strange, but they've kind of set themselves up they've done what the Heat have technically tried to do, where they're in between. They drafted Wemby, they drafted Castle, they have Chris Paul, Harrison Barnes. They got some veteran talent, but enough. The team is obviously still very young. But they just signed Vassell a couple of years ago to that extension. You have Keldon Johnson, whose role has completely changed from when Wemby first got there. And so they have a lot of assets that
their assets are really mostly, to me, in first round picks, not really to drafted capital outside of Castle. Like you're not trading Wemby, and if I don't think they're going to trade Castle, to be honest, in that kind of deal too.
Right.
I don't see why they should. My opinion, it just seems kind of stupid that you're going to go all in on a move for De'Aaron Fox in Wemby's second year when you already drafted a guy that is really good and he fits exactly the type of mold that they need in terms of a backcourt partner for Wemby in terms of how he can lock up the point of attack. He's been such a good defensive player. You're going to give that up for a guy. Yeah, sure, De'Aaron Fox is good, but like that plus maybe first round picks that you got back either in the Hawks deal that you made when you got traded DeJounte Murray over to Atlanta. The other first round picks that they have also are from me see. They made that draft night deal last offseason.
Right.
They had that second first round pick that they had in the draft last season that they ended up traded to Minnesota for, I think, their 2030 or 2031 first. So they have Minnesota's like future first round pick, and you also have a couple one, I believe, of Chicago as well. But they're pick protected though, so it's a little different. I think to me, the ones that are most valuable are probably going to be besides their own, which I don't know if they'd be willing to trade their own right now. But besides their own, you also have the Atlanta one, and then that the Minnesota one. But yeah, anyways, I think if you're going to stick with just Miami and Sacramento, it my opinion, if that deal happens, it's probably because Jimmy Butler somehow is getting rerouted to like a 3 or 4 team deal, and then those pieces are getting sent to Sacramento. That to me is how the trade probably will work in Miami's favor, where they can unlock those picks and maybe send out like 4 first rounders, a guy like Jaime or Deco, or maybe both. Like, and that seems like a lot, honestly. Just saying that out loud, but it might be what they need to do to get a player like him, so that they don't have to wait to 2026 and hope that he opts out. And it seems like if he gets traded, I think he might really consider signing that extension if he gets to a situation he wants to go to. And in that case, if you're Miami and you're on the phone with teams trying to not take back future salary that goes past 2025 and 2026, then what's the point if you don't have a guy like De'Aaron Fox even hitting the market, who you think probably should, you think is going to hit there because he's the type of guy that could. Like he's the type of contract that doesn't seem like he wants to re-sign with his own team. But what's looking like what's happening, and something that I think the Heat, probably don't want is that his agent's giving the heads up to Sacramento, like, what, if I were you guys, try to cash in on him now before he leaves and you walk away with nothing.
Right. It's a curious situation because he would definitely bring a different dimension to this team. I just have a hard time thinking, even if Jimmy got rerouted somewhere, I just have a hard time thinking you're going to get him without giving up Tyler. Like, I just don't, I don't see it. Like, I just don't see how, because if I'm the Kings, that's the first player I'm asking for.
Yeah. I think in that case, if you remind me, what's the rush to trade here then for De'Aaron Fox? Because in my opinion, one, you have Hero still on a really good contract for another 2 or 3 more seasons before he's up for he's up for an extension this offseason, but that extension wouldn't kick in for another 2 more seasons beyond this one. And then 2, he's younger than De'Aaron Fox. You have a guy that's 25 years old that's probably going to be an all-star potentially this season, or going to be borderline. When De'Aaron Fox, he's been an all-star, but he's also older, and he's also got to me, he has more miles in terms of the style he plays. Like, he relies on his athleticism. He's not, a premier jump shooter. He's not going to provide you the same kind of spacing that Hero provides. So if you're relying on his athleticism, how much longer does he really have before that starts to go? That's my concern. If you're going to trade a lot of assets, I would hold on to Hero, because I think you want to keep Hero in that type of deal and pair him up with Fox rather than you give up one for the other.
So let's look at that then, Brian, and let's say if suddenly the Heat are thinking that way, like, we maybe don't want to give up all these assets for that one guy who is a little bit older, who is good, but there are certain areas that we know we struggle as a team, and he would also struggle coming here. So let's kind of pivot from that, and then let's say we go around and we talk about Jimmy to Golden State, because then that looks different than us trading Hero right off the bat. Do we have breaking news?
No, I got an interesting trade that a listener just sent me. I actually want to put this together and show you guys. I think this, to me, I could see this working. Let's put it together. It's actually a trade that I had posted one yesterday, a 3-team deal where I would send Jimmy to Memphis.
Okay.
I really like the way that this one was proposed, because it expands on mine. Let me reselect the teams. So the teams it's going to be the Heat. We're basically changing Jimmy Butler in this deal and bringing back De'Aaron Fox is the package. So we're trading. We're trading with Miami. We got the Grizzlies. So Jimmy will be going to Memphis. We got the Raptors as another team that's going to absorb some salary. And then obviously the Kings, because they're going to be in this deal to trade De'Aaron Fox.
Right.
So we got a 4-team deal. To Miami is going to be, let me just start from what Miami's going to get first. So from Miami, we're getting back De'Aaron Fox and also Bruce Brown. To the Grizzlies, they're getting Jimmy Butler and Haywood Highsmith and also Alec Burks. All right, so the Raptors, they're going to get back both Luke Kennard and John Conchar. And then to the Kings, they're going to get back, Marcus Smart, Brandon Clark, and they're going to get Jaime Jaquez from Miami.
This could work. And just out of
I also missed one person. I missed Jalen Wells. He's in this deal too, going to Sacramento. That might be a lot of players. Like there might not be the same amount of players in this deal potentially, but I could see a version of this trade maybe working for each of these teams. Definitely in terms of the Kings, like what they're getting back. Smart, Clark, Jaquez, Wells, and they're getting probably 2 first-round picks is what this person has suggested, one from Miami, one from Memphis. It's interesting. I'll just say that. I think it's an interesting deal that if I'm Sacramento, you're trying to contend still because it seems like that's what the ownership and the front office wants to do.
Right.
And obviously the coaches the new coach that they have, that's an interim head coach, they want to make the playoffs. You can definitely contend with that group, and you still get some assets that you can build on the future with. So I think that trade is very interesting. Did I finish sending out Jalen Wells?
Firing too, right?
I did not.
What did you say, Kyle?
I was saying because Bruce Brown is an expiring deal, that's also an incentive to take him back in a deal like this.
Well, so in this deal, he has Bruce Brown going to Miami, but you can easily swap Bruce Brown and Marcus Smart, and that trade would still work. So, you can have Marcus Smart going to Miami, but I feel like at that point, Marcus Smart and De'Aaron Fox, you could make it work and you have one of them come off the bench, sure. But at the same time, I feel like maybe Bruce Brown would make the most sense for Miami if they can somehow get him back with De'Aaron Fox. I think he makes more sense off the bench than Marcus Smart. But that's just my opinion. So it depends, I guess, what these other teams would be willing to take back. I think for Sacramento, Marcus Smart makes sense because you need a point guard to replace. He's a win-now player, and he replaces the loss that you have of getting rid of De'Aaron Fox. And defensively, I think that's what they really need too. I really do like this deal. Like I could also see Brandon Clark really working out well in Sacramento, more than I think he would work out here. Like I'd like him in Miami, but like in Sacramento in particular, that intrigues me.
Especially if you're saying you're saying you're playing him next to Sabonis, right? Just defensively, he gives kind of some relief spots, or at least or pressure as far as rebounding, defending. If they decide to switch, Clark has a better chance of giving some relief to Sabonis. So I think that does work for sure. The Raptors get shooting out of Luke Kennard. John is okay, but Luke Kennard shoots the ball relatively well. His contract is also pretty favorable. So I just think it's one of those things where the deal works on multiple sides because, as we've talked on pod before, getting Bruce Brown alongside De'Aaron Fox, you get 2 defenders. Offensively, I think it figures itself out, but defensively, they fix some guard play issues. And you're off the books of Jimmy Butler. Sucks to see Haywood go, but you're off the books of Jimmy.
So I'm gonna throw this out there because I'm looking at the deal one more time, and obviously, like if Miami's giving up Jimmy Butler and Haywood Highsmith and Jaime, you don't really have a wing anymore on the team on the roster. So I'm just looking at the deal. The Kings would be getting back both Jaime and Jalen Wells. could maybe Jalen Wells not end up in Sacramento, but maybe he lands in Miami? Or is that too much going back to Miami if Miami gets De'Aaron Fox, Bruce Brown, and Jalen Wells?
I would love to see Wells if Wells can be added,
Right.
if it's possible.
But
It is definitely possible. He's not making a lot. So like that deal could definitely be, amended where we can send Wells to Miami. So let's try that out. So if we send Wells to Miami, I think Miami would have to send out another minimum salary in this deal, or is it still trade acceptable? No, it still works. So no, I mean Miami could definitely take back Wells, and it doesn't affect the trade at all. In fact, it helps them because then they only have to. They actually would meet the roster. They would meet the 14-man roster that they need in order to satisfy the minimum roster requirement. Toronto would just have to waive a player before processing the trade, and so does Sacramento as well. So I mean, both those teams could easily waive, like Grizzlies could waive Alec Burks' minimum salary if they really wanted to. I'm sure the Kings have another salary that they would potentially dump if they needed to.
Let's see. You scroll down.
You got Jay Crowder on the minimum salary, but like, do you really need him? Probably not. So they could probably waive him. So those are guys like that can potentially get waived on this type of deal. Now, if you're Memphis, you got a guy like, I don't know, Scottie Pippen Jr. You can potentially waive if you don't want to keep him. Jake LaRavia is on an expiring contract that's on a minimum. You have a couple guys that potentially could be, taken out of this deal potentially. So, I really do find that one trade package that this listener sent me. His name is Ryan Di Pentima. He actually was a UCF student at the time I went to UCF. So shout out to you. I think that was an interesting trade that he just sent me. And yeah, I like it personally, but how likely is it? I have no idea.
Right.
14 deals in particular are really hard to figure out.
Right.
But look, if Miami's been taking a lot of these different offers, and if they talk to Memphis and somehow Jimmy can, sign off a deal where he goes to, I mean, he doesn't really need to sign off, but like if there's assurance that he would play his hardest in Memphis, I could see that deal working out.
Right. So I want to see a deal. Like I want to move away from Fox. Like I think it's not even, honestly, unless they pull the wool over my eyes, it ain't happening. Like I just don't. There's nothing in my soul telling me that it's an idea, it's happening, it's capable. But what we know is the Heat want to move off of Jimmy Butler.
Right.
And Memphis, Golden State, I'll say the Suns, but the Suns are handicapped because of Bradley Beal.
Huge.
So I'm not even going to look at the Suns because unless something changes with Bradley Beal, then it's not even an option. But Golden State and Memphis seem to be the two that we hear about the most because obviously there's going to be sleepers, but the two that we hear about the most. Likelihood of him going to Golden State.
Can you throw the Raptors back in this deal too? Mainly because they've said they would facilitate this trade possibly. They're one of two. I mean, Charlotte was another team, but I think Raptors are a more likely partner than Charlotte.
Yeah. It's hilarious because this is a deal that I made in this fake mock trade deadline lead I'm in on a Discord with some people from the sports business classroom. So shout out to them. But the trade I made was actually between these same three teams where I traded Jimmy to Golden State. So I'll actually just do the same exact trade that we agreed to, and we can just talk about it. So the one I did was I sent Andrew Wiggins' contract over to Toronto. And then we traded from the Raptors still. We traded Kelly Olynyk to Miami and Bruce Brown to Miami. And then for Golden State, and this is where maybe it becomes like a sticking point, do we really know if Jonathan Kuminga is untouchable or not? In my deal, we did not make him untouchable. He was in the trade package and he was sent to Miami. Now, there's versions where he doesn't have to be in the deal, but for this exercise, let's just say he is. So if he goes to Miami, we're still looking at more salary that needs to be rerouted. Obviously, Jimmy needs to be sent to Golden State. So far, it works for the Raptors, but it doesn't work for Miami just yet and doesn't work for the Warriors. The Warriors still need to send out another $14.5 million in salary. And for Miami, actually it does work for Miami. But we need to basically still send out a couple more salary, and that last part of that package is going to be coming from Golden State. Now, for Golden State, when we originally made this deal, they actually already made a trade for Nikola Vucevic. So there were a couple contracts that weren't available at the time when I made the deal with them in our league that are. But when we did make the deal, Dennis Schroeder was actually in it. I might need to take off these restrictions because in order for Schroeder to be traded, he can be aggregated even though he got recently traded, but it would have to be processed on February 5th at the earliest. Trade deadline is February 8th, I believe. So it's a couple days before the trade deadline that he can be re-aggregated in a trade. And he was sent to Toronto. So we're looking at a deal where we're still needing to send a minimum salary because the Warriors are still over by $1.5 million. That minimum salary that we agreed to in our deal was actually Lindy Waters' salary, and he went to Toronto. So you're looking at a deal where Miami gets back Bruce Brown, Kelly Olynyk, Jonathan Kuminga. They trim $5.4 million in salary. The Raptors take back $5.7 million in salary. They're still under the apron. And they take back Andrew Wiggins' salary, Dennis Schroeder, Lindy Waters Lindy Waters the third, and then the Warriors get Jimmy Butler. That trade works. I still find that interesting. And that deal that we made also in our league, the Warriors traded a 2025 first-round pick that was protected in the top 6 picks of the draft, or top 5. It was top 5 protected. And if it didn't convey next season in the draft, then 2026 was unprotected. And if it did convey in 2025 during next year's draft, then Miami also got back 2 future first-round pick swaps, which I thought was really enticing because I think after years 2028 and 2030 would be the first years that Miami could actually do a pick swap with Golden State. We still have those pick protections with Charlotte and with OKC. So it's an intriguing possibility, I think, if we could somehow manage that. I probably got a lot back more than Miami is really going to get back in an actual Jimmy Butler trade. But like that was something we agreed to. And what Toronto got back in order to facilitate that deal is they got back 2 second-round picks, one from Miami. We traded our 2031 second-round pick, and then Golden State also traded their 2031 second-round pick in order for the Raptors to help facilitate by taking a lot of this extra salary, and really the Andrew Wiggins salary in particular.
I mean, that's technically him going back home. Technically, if we're talking about relationships.
Yeah.
He's from Canada. You have RJ up there already. I'm sure that to some degree it'd be like, yeah, sure, send me there. Especially if they are looking to, make a push here. Warriors don't think they're out of this thing, so they're of course acquiring Jimmy. They're still trying to maximize as much as they can. The window of Curry playing, and it gives them a different dynamic wing wise that they haven't had in a little bit since. Obviously, these 2 different kinds of players, but since KD really from the wing perspective. So it works. Kelly Olynyk being that I think I've talked about it here before that I think we need a backup big. Adding Kelly Olynyk is that backup big. He can also stretch the floor. And then Bruce Brown is a great point of attack defender. Or I'm maybe stretching on the great, but he's pretty good in being
he's
able to guard. Yeah. And having Jonathan Kuminga as part of this deal is probably the biggest buoy for me, mainly because you have a young guy that can continue to develop. And the idea of having Ware, Bam, and Kuminga in any, just defensively, if you're just thinking about it defensively, it's a really nice complementary set of players there. And you add Jovic who can play make. So there's some athleticism that you get out of this deal. That's mainly my thing. If you can get Kuminga to play alongside Bam, to play alongside Ware, as Jovic kind of extends his range and gets his skill set up a little bit more. There's some lineups that Spo can go to if you can get this kind of done. So
so here's my question. Let's say this exact trade goes through. That's the only move the Heat are making?
No, I don't think so.
You
probably not. I think they would look to try to still move on from Terry Rozier. You could probably end up moving Haywood Highsmith in the future deal as well, because I feel like his minutes would probably be non-existent in this type of trade. Like if you're basically trading Jimmy Butler for 3 role players, I don't see where Haywood's minutes would come in anymore because Kuminga's definitely probably gonna be a starter. I think Kelly and Olynyk could probably be the big off the bench next to Nico, or potentially Nico potentially. Well, no, I don't know. So really like that 3 big lineup, but no, Nico wouldn't start unless.
But this is what I'm saying,
they
because
run
now
without a point guard, because that could be the starting lineup.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You need you're bringing in all this talent. You still have a point guard,
right? And Bruce isn't a point guard. I mean, I think he played a little bit of point guard.
No more makeshift. No more ball handlers.
Bruce is more.
Yeah,
Bruce,
you need
he plays a lot of different positions. Like he's plays some small ball, like 4 and 5 too.
Right, but
I don't like that.
He's not your point. He's not going to be running. Like if you brought in Kuminga, Kelly, along with who you already have, you need someone to make like real decisions as to where the ball needs to go now.
And Tiff, do you feel like with this deal, are you saying that what, at least if this, to me, in this deal, and this is just my opinion, what you're saying is that Jovic is about to take up more ball handling responsibilities, or you're talking about doing it?
No, I don't even think if you're bringing in Bruce Brown, Kelly Olynyk, Jonathan Kuminga, Jovic is probably not even starting.
Well, I'm not so much from a starting perspective, but later game
off
like
the bench. Well, he would have to, because well, in this scenario, you still have Terry.
Which I think to your point, Tip, I think they move off of him. They have to. There's no way that they have what they have, and like especially out of this deal, and you keep Terry Rozier. Because where are his minutes coming from? Like, not that he should play per se, like just out of fit, but where would his minutes come from with adding these guys plus what the roster already has?
Well, the reality is, if I'm looking at this the way this is, then I'm and if I got Bam and Ware in my front court, right? So that's already sealed up. So then I'm going Kuminga.
3. Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm going Tyler.
Right.
I need a point guard.
Still need a facilitator.
Like I have to have with that lineup, you need a facilitator.
I mean, they're not playing a point guard right now, as is.
So are we saying?
But that's the and Brian, that's a lot of the problem.
I know that's the problem, but like doesn't mean that the point guard has to come from this trade. Is where I'm getting at.
Oh no, I'm saying.
And honestly,
I'm saying, would you consider doing a second trade?
Yes, I would consider doing a second trade, and probably would need to be moving Terry Rozier's contract because other than him and Duncan Robinson, I don't think you're going to be trying to trade Bam or Hero.
No.
Someone's asking for Jaime if we're looking. They're asking for Jaime if we're so if we're trading Rozier, because that's the assumption. If we're trading Rozier, there's somebody is potentially asking for Jaime in this deal
to do
to get a
point.
I
mean, that's a separate deal. I don't think it'd be in this trade.
Right.
Well, that's why I was right, Brian. That was my point. If this deal, let's say this deal holds up, and now you got what you got, are you looking at the entire roster and you're saying we need a point guard, and now you're making a second move?
Potentially, you know what we could do. Maybe we can add a new team, or I have to redo it, but. Forget that. What we'll just basically say is, like, I think what we could do is if you really wanted, like, say Marcus Smart, and I think the Grizzlies would be open to it, if they're not trying to re-extend him, you're kind of just doing a one-for-one swap between him and Bruce Brown. It doesn't have to be in that same package. It could just be in that same deal where you're just sending out Bruce Brown in a separate deal, because you don't have to aggregate salary in order to trade a player you just traded again. To expand it. So, I mean, that could be the point guard you end up getting back is like a guy like that in a second deal if it's not Terry Rozier's contract going out, because, teams probably don't want him right now until maybe he becomes expiring next offseason. So, that could be a potential possibility. The other possibility is that you do expand the deal, and maybe what ends up happening is, like I was saying earlier, maybe this becomes the assets you get back from a Jimmy Butler trade that entices Sacramento enough to where they maybe want Kuminga back and maybe some of the draft capital or whatever, so that they can you can flip it, and then 2, Miami has the draft assets to be able to make it work. So that could be the deal that could happen. Now, I don't know how likely it is that Golden State will be willing to go that far in. From what I've kind of seen online, it seems like they might be willing to trade Wiggins, but are they willing to trade Wiggins and Kuminga? And if they are not, then how many carrots are they going to sweeten that offer? Because Miami's been saying that they don't want to take back all this extra salary because he's got 3 years left on his deal. From what I saw in Barry's story this morning, Miami wants a carrot or a sweetener for every year that they're taking back after this season. So if you're taking back 2 additional seasons after this season, you're looking at probably 2 first-round picks. Is Golden State really going to do that? Plus, send Wiggins and Kuminga? I don't know.
Right.
It happened in minor league, but will it happen here? Who knows?
Is it? And I guess my question now is, out of just now, I'm sure this is fully Jimmy. You're obviously, we've talked that there's you're not sure how much draft capital you get back for Jimmy at this particular point, especially after you take into account all the things that have taken place. However, for a team that has been kind of strapped in getting draft capital, should that be the primary thought here? Yeah, you want some players, yeah, you want some expirings, but really the play here should probably be getting back either a young player and some draft capital. And that's just my opinion. I don't know if that works in regards to y'all, but I think that's, if you're going to get, at this point, they said they've lowered their standards as far as what they're going to get back as a return. I still think that still has a bar in which they're not willing to go beneath.
From what I understand, they lowered their standards in terms of that they're not so hard-strung on taking back feature salary that goes past the year of 2025-26. But it depends on what that contract is. If it's a decent player on a decent enough contract, I think what Barry Jackson reported today was that they're willing to entertain it, but it's going to come at the cost of another team attaching, a carrot, meaning draft capital, whatever that might be, a first-round pick probably, so that Miami, takes that, additional salary that goes past the 2025-2026 season, meaning next season. So, yeah, I really don't know, because right now I feel like if that type of trade was out there, Jimmy would have been moved.
Right.
It's kind of where we're still at this, we're still at this spot where we don't know what's going to happen. We're stuck in a holding pattern, and something's going to have to come down at some point, and it's either going to be Miami's stance on what they're going to be willing to take back as their compensation for Jimmy, or it's going to be the team that wants to get Jimmy if they really feel like they need him to be able to contend or compete. And that really could just come from ownership, giving the front office an ultimatum, I want to get it done. We've seen that with Phoenix, for example. That owner was basically telling James Jones, you need to make this trade to get Kevin Durant. We're going to trade all of our first-round picks and all of our, young assets to get Kevin Durant because he wanted Kevin Durant. If there's a GM or an owner that's out there willing to go after Jimmy Butler, and it seems like his market's not that hot, so is it really giving up a whole lot by giving up 1 or 2 first rounders and a couple salary? I don't think so. I think that's worth it. If I'm a team that can get a Jimmy Butler, I think that should be the market for him. It just hasn't been there yet, as far as we know, because we don't really know the offers. But I think that's what Miami's hoping for, at least. I think that's what they think his value is.
Because I think you have to get, in my opinion, if we've been talking about youth, we've been talking about buying into this shift. Obviously, they've been middling for the last 5 or 6 years, right? If you're gonna push the direction to let's play our young guys, let's see what this looks like, right? Then trading Jimmy has to facilitate that being continued, right? We've lauded their scouting and being able to pick late first round or at least somewhere in the teens. Does that look like also, and I guess this is maybe a little bit of a sidebar, do you make a trade with OKC to get that 2025 back to make it, this is not part of this deal, but just as a, hey, we're going in the direction of continuing to build this roster. for the future and seeing how we play with guys who've been in tough situations. You know, Tyler's played some playoff minutes. Bam has played some playoffs time.
I would say, so I think the answer to your question, if I see what you're trying to get to, like, do you want to start making deals to open up your pick situation? Like, they don't have to make a deal. If they make the playoffs, then the 2026 pick becomes unprotected, and in 2028 ends up becoming unprotected as well to Charlotte. So they wouldn't have to make any deals because that's what that they've agreed to in terms of the terms that they have set with these two teams. So like they don't have to make any deal if they make the playoffs, which right now I think they probably might, just because the East is that weak right now. Even without Jimmy on the roster, I think they could still make the playoffs. So I don't think Miami needs to make that type of move unless they have a deal lined up like today where they need to really open up those picks before the end of the season to make a move. Whoever that might be, we've been talking about De'Aaron Fox, but if that becomes the target that they need to, really go back to those two teams and unprotect those picks, then sure. If you unprotect 2025 and 2027, then Miami opens up the 2029 first and 2031 first of theirs that they can end up trading. So yeah, like it's interesting in theory, but right now that hasn't come up to the point where they need to do that. And there's a possibility where they still might not even need to, depending on what picks they get back for Jimmy. They could end up using those picks instead and not have to really trade out.
All right. So Brian, when the deadline hits and it passes, where is Jimmy?
Honestly, I don't think it's going to be Phoenix. I think that ship has sailed. I personally think it's going to be Golden State. I think they're going to eventually come around and listen. That from what we've heard right now, they're not like all in, but if they're at least actively talking again, somebody somewhere has told them they need to get this done potentially because there's not much time left for them to contend with the roster that they currently have set. And if they can get him at a price where it's at a relative discount, I don't see why they pass up on it. For Jonathan Kuminga, who they might not even want to extend anyway, I just don't see why they wouldn't want to make this deal. But if it's not them, listen, I mean, I like Memphis too. I do think of all those teams, to me, I think that's where Jimmy can contend the most right now. And
Agreed.
I think that's where if I was Jimmy, I would try to push myself there rather than Phoenix. I get the reason why he wants to go to Phoenix is because he wants his extension, his future salary guaranteed.
Right.
But like, if he can't get that right now, if he can't get to Phoenix this season, and you're left with a choice of sticking out in Miami with your player option, or at least being a rental in Memphis, and you can show out and earn that contract with a good playoff run in Memphis, maybe win a title. Like, why wouldn't you do that for Jimmy? You want to keep getting suspended in Miami and, not even collect your paycheck right now, or actually compete? Because I think bottom line, like, Jimmy wants to win, but he also like wants that money too at the same time. And he can't get both today, but he can at least get one of them maybe today. And I think if he goes to Memphis, he gets that now. And then hopefully in the off season, if he does well enough, he can maybe get that contract with Memphis after the season, or they can end up trading him to Phoenix. Who knows? I mean, Memphis could end up trading him to sign and trade to Phoenix or something like that.
Right.
We'll see.
Kyle, where does he end up?
I think it's Golden State, but I also think there are two sleeper teams that he could possibly end up in. Funny enough, I think some way, like we started, he could end up in Sacramento, possibly. Not saying that the Heat get back Fox, but just as, there's been a lot of reports on the deal getting expanded to more than 3 or 4 teams, which is kind of nuts to hear. I don't even know how you get to organize, how you even organize the movement on that. But so he ends up in Sacramento because they talked about a win player now. Like, they want somebody who they can still get something out of, not just young players. And then also, I think the third team is up in the air, in my opinion. It can be somebody we didn't anticipate at all. I don't think he's here past the 6th. I can't imagine that they want to continue to drag this on for the next 2 to 3 months reasonably. And contrary to maybe popular belief right now, I don't think the Heat are in a position where they're just like, yeah, we just don't feel like paying you. I feel like if he was playing hard, if there were some of the things that took place that haven't been taking place, then he's not getting sent home without pay. He's not getting suspended without pay. So I think they'll sit down and talk about it and say, hey, look, we're going to figure it out where you want to go. We've got some places that we've been on the phone with. Sign off on that, and we can get this thing done. And the biggest thing for Golden State, and this is quietly kind of talked about, is he doesn't want Memphis because it's not lucrative business-wise. I think Jimmy's not just thinking about the contract extension he can get, but also post-career where he wants his career, where he wants to have his children at, post-career, just kind of comfortably. Golden State is probably the most attractive idea, especially if you're talking about with Steph Curry. You've got some other guys on that roster who have, played some ball. And he can open, and again, I know that most people aren't thinking of it from this perspective, but you can open a Big Face Coffee out in Sacramento and it's going to do numbers because it's California. So he's not just thinking about the extension. I think the extension's a piece of it, but I also think
San Francisco, I think you mean, right?
San Francisco, sorry. Yeah. It's somewhere where he wants to be able to extend business. And so I think that's really what's really the biggest deal here is he wants to go somewhere that's, ironically, he talks about his daughters a lot, not so much ironically in the sense that he wouldn't talk about them, but that is clearly his main focus as he's getting older. And so I'm assuming the idea is somewhere that's more family friendly for him going forward. And if he's going to hang it up and call it a career, he's not hopping from one place to the next. He's got somewhere that he can just kind of, all right, I did my bid, I competed, and that's that. So I think that's, probably Golden State is the primary spot. And if it's not there, maybe Sacramento, if the Heat try to get in on this deal between Sacramento and San Antonio.
Okay. So we just got a clip from ESPN, and they're basically talking about a possible trade with Jimmy to the Warriors. We're going to run it, and then we'll do a brief discussion, and guys will be in and out.
I would expect that the next week they're going to look for maybe a stretch 5 like a Nikola Vucevic or a Miles Turner if the price comes down for expiring contracts or second-round picks. I talked to Steph.
That cut out. I don't know if Frank
it cut out.
To do that. Let me see if I have the clip up again.
Okay. The next week they're going to look for maybe a stretch.
Or is that the end of the clip? I think that might be the end of it.
If the price comes down for expiring contracts or second-round picks, I talked to Steph.
I think I found it on Twitter.
Yeah, that's the end of the clip. It's just they're trying to get Jimmy discounted and get a stretch big. That's why Jimmy's appealing to them now, because the prices come down on them. That's what they're saying.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at the clip from Twitter. It is the same clip, so they only cut part of it out. But yeah, so if that's the case, hilarious, because those two players, Vucevic and Jimmy Butler, were literally the two players that Golden State got back in our Discord mock trade deadline lead. So I just find that funny that the two players that they targeted were going to be the same two players that are being discussed right now. So it could happen. I mean, it happened in our league, and what I think I remember the Vucevic deal being. I remember being Gary Payton and Kevon Looney, Buddy Hield, and then they traded. They didn't trade it first. I think they traded 1 second-round pick. I think maybe 1 or 2 second-round picks from Golden State went to Chicago, and that was the deal. And they took it. I mean, that's what Chicago ended up taking in our leads. So I don't know if actual Chicago ownership would, but I know he's on the expiring, right? I think Vucevic only has 1 year left on his deal.
Yeah,
so if the Bulls are trying to get rid of him, I don't know if we're gonna get a first rounder for him. He's kind of up in there in age. Like, he's having a good season, but he's 34 years old. Like, I think 2 second round picks is probably his market, and then, you know, a mix of those, like, expirings and, you know, a couple decent role players in that deal if they end up getting back, like, Buddy Hield. I feel like that could work out for Chicago, so I'm interested in it for them, but there might be other teams that might be offering more.
Well,
Like,
yeah,
for the Lakers, I don't see why you wouldn't offer a couple more pieces.
I was thinking the other, you know, they were talking about a stretch big, but I also think Golden State, if they grab Jimmy, they could also look at grabbing Cam Johnson from the Nets as like an addition to not so much this deal, but like if they're talking about making moves overall, there's going to be some movement beyond just Jimmy. They're going to go ahead and get somebody else. Turner is interesting from the perspective that at this late in the season, they've kind of pivoted to being, you know, to him being moved because they don't want to extend him, which is interesting. That's that's one of the quietly, you know, it was mentioned. I don't see as many people talking about it, is that Indiana is now willing to move on from him, which is interesting to me. So maybe this deal looks like the Pacers, Miami, Golden State, and whatever that looks like. If that helps the deal get facilitated out of like assets and stuff of that nature. So, and so, I would love McConnell if he's available.
McConnell who?
TJ McConnell.
Yeah, you're not getting him. He ain't becoming available. Like, something would really have to happen for them to turn him over. That's not happening.
I think if you're the Pacers, you're only giving up the one guy that you know is probably not going to be on your roster next season, which is probably Turner. So
yeah.
No, I think and he's a free agent after the season, same as Vucevic. So it's basically targeting 2 of the expiring contract bigs out on the market, which makes sense. I mean, in a way, it's a rental if you don't have to technically re-sign him, and if you do, if you're Golden State, you can get them at a price maybe cheaper next season when they become free agents. So we'll see.
All right, so Jimmy is on this team after the trade deadline. Is he starting? Is he coming off the bench?
I don't think he's playing another game with Miami, to be honest.
No, I don't think so either.
I think they'll probably have to figure out a way where they can like mutually separate ways.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like what they did with Lowry.
Yeah.
And then he did actually end up coming back, but I don't see a scenario where Jimmy plays right now for a while. Like we're talking like at least a month.
Okay.
Before he comes back, it makes any like there would have to be like serious steps that Jimmy would have to prove to the front office before he gets back on the floor and coaching staff. Because there's been, from what I've understand from Ethan, like it's not just Pat Riley and Jimmy having beef. It's also now Spo too. And in that case, like you can't play him.
Right. I mean,
if you're Miami, like what's the point of you even playing Jimmy? You don't care about if he gets his contract next year. That's not my problem. If you're them, like you sit it out, and then that's on you. If you want to opt in, opt in. But we're still not playing you. So
I mean,
you're not gonna earn your contract now when you didn't want to play earlier in the season.
Right. Like you don't play him because you know he talked about the style of play changing, which I think is one of the things that's interesting that I guess we've talked about, but I'm not sure if everyone else has talked about that. You know, when he got back from not feeling well, I guess, and then he got, you know, he was away for another reason. You know, the style of play had changed team-wise. Like the ball moved differently. He felt like he just was, you know, standing in the corner. And even with him engaged, the offense looks completely different. Whatever Spo was trying to implement I'm going to assume is what got implemented while he was away. And so you don't play him because the team itself has bought in to whatever Spo's scheme is. And as much as it pains me to say, it doesn't fit Jimmy Butler because that's who they were playing without. Like this has more to do with money than anything else, obviously, but it also has to do with change. Like Bam was playing, the whole team plays faster. I'm not saying Jimmy holds up the game. I'm just saying his play style doesn't fit the way that they're playing right now. And you don't play him for that reason, just personnel wise. You're a lot of guys have kind of shifted into figuring out what their roles are and what they want to do on the floor and how to contribute, as I've mentioned before. And it's not a post up for 8 seconds, 9 seconds, unless it's a quick move to the basket or something like that. They've just completely played differently since he's been gone. And you can't tell your teammates it's not about you, but also like not support, them saying, hey, look, nobody believes us in us because you're not here. And we're having to deal with it anyway, having to answer questions,
Right.
about things that you are supposed to be here to answer questions about. And Tyler's gotten questions, Bam's gotten questions. I mean, we saw him roll his eyes last night. Just nobody wants to deal with that all season. Like, to your point, Brian, like dealing with that the rest of the season would be absolutely pissy. I'm not gonna lie. That'd be the most annoying like storyline to follow. I would hate it for every game to have a question about Jimmy and Jimmy's not here. Like, so I hope
he would be away from the team, and I think that would be it. Like, he'd just be away from the team.
Well,
yeah, I'm just looking right now. Like, yeah, I mean, how many games would that be if he sat out? Like 20, 30
well,
games?
they're saying this suspension leads up right to the trade deadline, right?
Yeah, it's 5
Right,
game
yeah.
suspension right now, indefinitely.
Yeah.
And like it's indefinitely like 5 games for now. Obviously, like the NBA Players Association would step in after that if it's going
Right.
to be any
I was
longer,
gonna
unless he
say,
does something else that
right.
comes up. Which who knows at that point? Like, who the fuck knows? If they don't trade Jimmy, Jimmy can come back and start saying some shit and get suspended for that again. Like, they're at a point where he costs and he's gonna get suspended. So
Right.
like they'll play the game for the rest of the season. That's what Bobby Marks was saying. And look, I don't blame the Heat at this point, because I think in a way Jimmy put them in a situation where now it's even more difficult to get him where he wants to go. And that's kind of why we haven't had a trade just yet.
Right. Well, I look at it this way. In a matter of days, we'll have an answer.
Hopefully.
No, we'll have an answer. He's either here or he's not. Like, that's the answer.
Okay. Well, I mean, I feel like that's not an answer, though.
No.
We don't want that. The answer is he's got to be gone.
A lot of things are happening we don't want. But
because there's still questions and no answers if he's still on the roster, and we're still doing the same song and dance in the offseason.
But this is, Brian, this is where we landed. This is where we are. But I just think we're going to have an answer soon, and we'll circle the wagons again, and either we'll be in a different direction or we will be exactly where we are right now. That is pretty much what it is.
Well, Chat's right. 9 more days to go.
That's it. 9 days. I want to thank you guys for coming on. I'm going to thank myself for hosting short notice. G has been fined, just so everybody knows. He's not allowed to wear aloe for the next 4 shows. So if he shows up wearing aloe, I'm fining him. Just let y'all know. And y'all can roast him all y'all want in the chat. So just be mindful of that. But everybody be safe, be kind, and we will see you. When's the next game? Tomorrow
Against the Cleveland Cavaliers. So we'll do
tomorrow. Strus is about to get loose.
Big test.
That's all I know. Strus is about to get loose. All right, guys. Be safe, be loved. Good night.
Really.